What is up, guys? I'm Inspector McDuck, and in this Lies of P lore video, we're going to unravel the mystery of the Hermit's Cave. Now, I do have what I think is a pretty compelling theory about the identity of the Hermit in the Hermit's Cave, but I don't want to spoil anything yet. Let's do some detective work first, and hopefully that will make the big reveal at the end of the video that much more worth it. So let's try to figure out the identity of the Hermit and why he's an important enough character to have an entire area dedicated to himself in the game. And not only that, but he has a line of dialogue and he drops a record when we defeat him. So let's start with what we know. The Hermit's Cave is an optional location that we can explore towards the end of the game after we have found and deciphered the rusty cryptic vessel. And that describes the cave as a place where an old man who went crazy after losing his family locked himself in to pray. Now, as we venture through the cave, we fight a lot of carcass monsters, and we eventually come across an item called Someone's Report Notes Notebook. The notebook describes the Hermit as kind, but as someone who's suffering from the petrification disease, and apparently on his way to becoming a carcass monster. It then talks about the truth behind the alchemist's actions and how that will eventually be uncovered. And then the writer of the note identifies themselves as Medoro the reporter before it ends. So then we go deeper into the cave, and once we reach the end of it, we find several inscriptions written on the cave walls. Now we can assume that these inscriptions were written by the Hermit himself. The water is strange. I'm not sure when it started, but my tears and blood have also turned blue. I've seen the revelations of the blue butterfly. They've asked me to free them from this prison of time. The fairy is far. The fairy is crying. The hands on the clock have gone round and round to find the boy's future. Now, after reading this message, we come to an opening where a large carcass monster is sitting. And as we approach it, it stands up and aggroes, so we fight it. And upon defeating it, it speaks to us. And it also drops a record called Misty Era. Now finally, in the last small room in the back of the cave, there's another note written on the wall. I leave the butterflies writing here. Remember, you are human. Now it's time to get out of the string. There's also a safe, and inside the safe we find Black Cat's hunting apparel and some quartz. So that's the end of the cave, and that's the end of the information that we get from the cave itself. So at this point we have a few questions that we can try to answer. First, who was the Hermit in the cave? Second, why did he retreat to the cave in the first place? And third, why was he receiving communications from the blue butterfly, whom we know to be Sophia? Well, let's do some digging and find some answers. So first we need to get some information out of the way that is a little misleading and seems to be irrelevant, and that's around the Black Cat's outfit that we find in the safe at the back of the cave. Now, on my first playthrough, I wondered why the Hermit might be stashing the Black Cat's apparel in his safe, and I thought that there might be a connection there. But after rereading the description for the vessel and the outfit, it confirms that they're not related to the Hermit. Let's forget about the crazy old man, hide the stolen goods, and take them back out once it quiets down. So here it says flat out that thieves and not the Hermit were using the cave to store their stolen goods. And the description for the outfit says that it is an extra set stolen by robbers who were drawn to its quality. So all of this information seems to indicate that the Hermit has nothing to do with the thieves or the items in the cave, so we can't draw any conclusions there. Now with that out of the way, let's look again at Someone's Report Notes notebook and see what we can find there. First, it was written by Medoro the reporter. Now, could he be the Hermit? Well, he's definitely an important character to the story since we find several things written by him throughout the game. And Hugo actually mentions that Medoro saved him during the workshop tower collapse. So he could be a worthy of enough character to become the Hermit. But from the way his note is written, we actually have proof that he's not the Hermit himself. The kind Hermit helped me. So this tells us that Medoro is not the Hermit, but it is theoretically possible that the original Hermit could have died or left the cave, and Medoro ended up mutating into a monster and took his place, and that's who we end up fighting. But Medoro mentions in the note that the Hermit is the one suffering from mutations and mentions running out of fresh water, so we can probably assume that Medoro was not mutating and he possibly died from dehydration. So at this point, I'm 100% confident in saying that Medoro is not the Hermit himself. But being the only character we know by name to have visited the cave, it is possible that he turned into the monster that we fight at the end of it. And since we technically don't have any information to disprove this theory, we'll say it's our only lead for now. So Medoro as a candidate for the Hermit's true identity, 5% probability. That's a bit of a dead end. So what other clues can we collect to help us out? Well, let's look back at the description from the vessel. There's a place called Hermit's Cave. An old man who went crazy after losing his family locked himself up there to pray. So it's not much to go on, but it seems like a deliberate hint dropped to us by the developers. Do we know any men in the game who have lost their family? We do find the Frozen Man's letter in a building on Elysian Boulevard Street, and in that, a man writes about Louise and Charlotte, who seem to be his wife and daughter, and how he's suffering from petrification and sent them to the cathedral for safety. Later, we end up finding the woman's prayer inside the cathedral, and it also mentions Charlotte, which insinuates that it was written by Louise. But that's the end of the family's story as far as I can tell. So could the Frozen Man be the man who went crazy after losing his family and retreated to the cave? It's possible, but I don't think so, especially because I don't think that they would create such a large mystery about the cave and the Hermit and have the true identity of the Hermit be someone as seemingly inconsequential as this unnamed Frozen Man. But again, we don't have evidence to disprove it as a possibility, so for now we'll say that we can't rule it out completely. So, Frozen Man as a candidate for the Hermit, 10% probability. All right, so far, 2 leads and neither of them are very promising. So here's where we get to really get in, do some detective work, find some more information, and see if we can get any more clues about who this Hermit is. So that's all for the more obvious information, but just like we did with the Gemini video, let's look at some contextual clues and see if we can narrow it down even more. First, the monster at the end of the cave speaks to you when you defeat him, and aside from major bosses, there's no other enemy in the entire game that actually speaks to us.
Perhaps it's better to end this way. Get while the getting's good.
And the phrase, get while the getting's good, means getting out of a situation before it takes a turn for the worse. So I believe that he was saying that we saved him before he lost all the rest of his humanity and turned into a monster completely. Second, he drops a record. Now, this is an incredibly important detail. All but one of the records that we find in the game are given to us after we've helped NPCs fulfill a personal quest. We get records from the Weeping Woman, from Cecile, Adelina, Antonia, Eugenie, Red Fox and Black Cat, Belle, and Sophia. The only record we get outside of an NPC quest is Someday, which we purchased from the merchant in the Black Rabbit Brotherhood hideout, and I don't have any theories at the moment as to why that one is unique. Now, while we're talking about records, keep in mind that when we listen to them, we gain humanity, right? We get them when we perform humane choices in the game, and we're rewarded for that. So why then would the developers have a random monster drop a record? And that's the thing. I don't think that they would. The fact that the Hermit speaks to us and drops a record is the most major indicator that once I started thinking about it, I realized that the Hermit has to be someone that we know in the game, or at least someone that we know of. Let's consider one more very important contextual clue. The Hermit is apparently receiving communications from Sophia, as indicated by the writing on the walls, and she actually initially asks him to free her. But as far as we know, Sophia's power as a listener only allows her to communicate with puppets and not with humans. So if that's the case, how is the Hermit receiving communications from Sophia if he's a human? Now, I think that either Sophia lied to us about only being able to communicate with puppets, which is unlikely, or maybe she can communicate to someone who has very close ties with her. Blood ties. So let's sidebar for a second and look at the description for the Rose Estate incident left as a mystery news article. It describes a mass petrification disease outbreak at the Monad Charity House where everyone died, including the leader of the alchemists, Valentinus Monad. A loading screen in the game also gives us a bit more information about the incident, saying that Valentinus, the leader of the alchemists, died in a mysterious accident, and even his beloved daughter went missing. So, who was Valentinus's missing daughter? It's Sophia.
I am the daughter of Valentinus, leader of the alchemists. Simon was my father's right-hand man. Ambition overwhelmed him, however, and he spread the petrification disease, taking countless lives.
So let's put together all of this information and see what we've got. We know that Valentinus was the leader of the alchemists. Everyone was reported to have died during the Rose Estate incident, including Valentinus. As a result of this, Simon Manus was able to take over as leader of the alchemists. And lastly, the loading screen says that Sophia went missing during the incident, and we find her in the alchemist's tower, so we can assume that Simon abducted her. So this information changes everything. It's amazing, because now we have evidence that proves that the news article isn't 100% truthful. It says that there are no confirmed survivors so far, but we know that Sophia obviously survived and went missing during the event. And we also know that this wasn't an initial report of the incident because it mentions the city of Krat putting a stop to the investigation, insinuating that at least some degree of time had passed after the incident. This means one of two things. Either A, the newspaper doesn't have enough information to report correctly, or B, the information that it's reporting on is actually being controlled or manipulated by an outside influence. Let's go back to Medoro for a moment. Why was he in the Hermit's Cave in the first place? Medoro was an investigative journalist who sought the truth. And in an item we find called Special Report Foreigner's Confession, we learn that he was fired from the newspaper for spreading false information and promoting social unrest. The information in question was about the truth behind the alchemist's actions and how they're responsible for spreading the petrification disease. Combine that with the fact that Simon took over as leader of the alchemists after the Rose Estate incident, and we have pretty clear evidence that the alchemists are in control of the media in Krat. They branded Medoro as a liar, and he became their enemy. In turn, Medoro went into hiding in the cave. So, we know that alchemists control the media. We know that Simon is the one behind the Rose Estate incident, and that he abducted Sophia, but he could never let that information get out publicly. And we've all but proven that the alchemists created this news snippet as a cover-up to throw people off the trail. All right, time out, McDuck. What does all this have to do with the Hermit? Everything. Absolutely everything. In the Rose Estate article, we're specifically told that Valentinus died during the incident, which conveniently lets the public know that Simon is now the new leader of the alchemists. But now that we know that the information in the article was being controlled, we can't take it at face value. And once I realized that, it got me thinking that someone else could have actually survived the incident aside from Sophia, her father, Valentinus. So now that we've collected all of this information about Krat and the cave, here's my official theory about the true identity of the Hermit. Valentinus Monad was the original leader of the alchemists. He was beloved by the people of Krat and even had a statue erected in his honor. He was dedicated to the city, and his intentions, as far as we can tell, were pure and benevolent. His right-hand man, Simon Manus, was different. He had plans to become a god and achieve immortality, but he didn't have the means to do it. He needed more power, and he needed Valentinus out of his way. Conveniently for Simon, as someone who has the ability to read minds, he somehow learned that Valentinus's daughter, Sophia, had secret powers that could be of use to him. And that's when he realized that Sophia was the key to solving both of his problems. So during a time when Valentinus and Sophia were both at the Rose estate, which was their home, Simon busted in with plans to abduct Sophia. And to get rid of Valentinus, he infected him with the petrification disease. But as far as we know, the disease doesn't kill immediately. It takes time. So that's when Simon used Sophia to force Valentinus into a terrible agreement to go into hiding and tell no one of what happened that day if he valued his daughter's life. So the only way for Valentinus to guarantee his daughter's safety was to comply with Simon, step down as the leader of the alchemists, and meet Simon's demands. The Hermit is described as an old man who went crazy after losing his family. Valentinus lost his family that day, and the public was told that he was dead so that Simon could take the throne. Infected with the petrification disease, he fled to a cave in the barren swamp, and not knowing that the water there was contaminated, he eventually started to mutate into a carcass monster. By the time Medoro ventured into the cave, Valentinus was disfigured enough that Medoro didn't even recognize him. The kind hermit helped me, but he knows he's not going to last much longer either. Terrible mutations from the side effects of the petrification disease neutralization process. The worst part is that Valentinus couldn't even tell Medoro the truth because he was still trying to protect Sophia. But the most tragic part of this story is that Sophia found a way to reach her father, and she pleaded with him to come save her. I mentioned earlier that, as far as we know, Sophia's abilities only allow her to communicate with puppets, but I do think it would be plausible for her to be able to communicate with someone that she shares a strong bond with, a blood connection. She was using her powers to reach out to him, but for whatever reason, Valentinus didn't realize that it was Sophia that he was receiving messages from, right? He refers to her as the Blue Fairy and the Blue Butterfly, and she may not have even known how bad his situation was in the cave. Now, fortunately, Sophia did end up finding her hero in us, Geppetto's puppet. And since she developed abilities to control time, she was able to manipulate us into a timeline where we explored the cave and would find her messages on the wall. And we did. We explored the cave, we discovered Valentinus. We gave him a peaceful end in his last threads of humanity. And just like the other NPCs that we give closure to, Valentinus gave us his record, one that describes the horrible sacrifice he had to make in order to protect his daughter. Though, sadly, he had no idea what kind of horrors she was actually going through. To protect the people you love, sometimes you must take steps through uncertain times. It's a tragic story that sheds even more light on the horrible deeds of Simon and the alchemists. The Hermit is unique. He has an entire area of the game dedicated to himself and the mystery around him. He has a voice line when we defeat him, and most importantly, he drops a record. All signs that point to him being someone of significance and not a random or lesser character. So, Valentinus Monad as a candidate for the Hermit, 99% probability. Guys, thank you so much for watching. This was a fun one to do, but remember, this is all a theory. This is just my theory, okay? You are welcome to disagree with me and come up with your own conclusions. And leave me a comment on this video if you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you think this is maybe the craziest theory you've heard about the Hermit, whatever. If you've got something to say it. I want to hear it. And with that, guys, thank you again for watching. I appreciate you, and hopefully I'll see you soon. McDuck out. Peace.